I'm Grace Turner, 34, and the moment I step into my parents' backyard for my brother's birthday, the old ache settles under my ribs like it never left, the kind that makes you stand straighter, just to breathe. Laughter rides the music while string lights tremble over the pool, and I tell myself I'll stay an hour, smile for a photo, then go home to my quiet apartment and the stack of lab reports waiting on my desk. Kyle spots me first, tipping his chin as if we share a secret. I want to believe that means peace. My mother's hand finds my elbow, cool and polished, guiding me toward the table like I'm a guest who needs managing. My father stands by the grill, arms folded, a familiar checkpoint I've passed 100 times, never without a critique. Someone calls my name for a picture, and I lean in shoulder to shoulder with the brother I used to protect from playground bullies. There's frosting on paper plates, a chorus counting down to candles, and somewhere beneath it all, a feeling I've learned to heed, the sense that something is slightly off and I'm the only one who notices. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe if you've ever walked into a room that told you exactly who you used to be. I teach chemistry at a public high school on the east side of town and take photos on weekends, sunsets over the river, hands at work in small shops, the honest lines of ordinary faces. I rent a modest one-bedroom close to campus, the kind of place where the dishwasher hum is company and the streetlight sketches silver across the wall at night. The home I grew up in sits across town in a tidy suburb with wide lawns and a flag that never tangles. My parents built their life on routine appearances and a belief that strength means never letting anyone see you struggle. They raised Kyle and me on Saturday chores, Sunday manners, and an unspoken rule that our family story would always be the approved version no matter what it cost to keep it polished. My mother believes in smooth edges and a full dessert tray. She can change the subject faster than any news anchor when a conversation gets uncomfortable. My father runs the house like a briefing, short on small talk, long on expectations, a man who measures worth in accomplishments that show. When I chose teaching over a corporate path, he called it nice work for someone who wants summers off, and I learned to swallow explanations about why a good lab day can feel like a win you carry home. Kyle, 3 years younger and quicker, with a joke than a plan learned early that laughter could redirect the room. By high school, the habit had become a strategy. In our house, if a story ended in a chuckle, no one looked for the parts that hurt. I came back for this party because my mother asked in that voice that sounds like kindness until you try to say no, and because my therapist once told me that clear boundaries sometimes mean showing up on your own terms. I parked on the street like a neighbor and let myself in through the side gate, thinking I would say happy birthday, hug my mother, and leave before the sun dipped behind the tall hedges. The backyard looked like a magazine, photo balloons at the fence, matching napkins, a white cake waiting on a stand. Old friends of Kyle's clustered near the pool faces I recognized from yearbooks, and bleachers faces that never looked quite my way when I needed them to. Someone greeted me with a story about the time I tripped at a school assembly and the circle bubbled with nostalgia I didn't share. I laughed off the memory because that's what the moment required, then took a slow breath and counted reasons to keep the peace. I've always wanted to believe that families can learn new ways to be together, that people can grow past bad habits when the years stack up and the stakes get real. My work taught me patience. Teenagers come to science with their own histories, and you meet them where they are if you expect them to trust you. I carried that same patience into the yard, told myself Kyle's quick grin could mean a truce, and that my father's stiff nod was the best he could manage. When Kyle drifted over with a paper plate and said we should grab a picture like we used to, I let my guard settle just a little. I could see the camera set up on a small tripod near the edge of the deck, and I told myself it was harmless to stand where he pointed if it would make everything go easier. Behind the music and the small talk, there was a difference I felt in my bones. The gap between my simple, work-worn days and this careful display of cheer, the distance between a life built on showing up and a life built on being seen. I thought about the students who tell me the truth only after I've spent weeks proving they're safe with me, and I wondered what it would take for that kind of safety to exist in my own family. My mother's eyes followed me the way a host watches a guest who might spill something on the carpet, and my father stayed planted by the grill as if crossing the patio would concede too much ground. I stood at the edge of the pool, for the camera lifted my chin to the lens, and tried to believe that a picture could hold the moment steady long enough for us to start over. Kyle slid an arm around my shoulder, light and brotherly, the way we used to stand for school photos when neither of us knew how the world would shape us. He told me to hold still just a second, and I did, because standing still has always seemed easier than making a scene. Across the water, the string lights swayed as a breeze moved through the hedges, and the deck boards felt warm through the soles of my sandals. I remember thinking the night might end quietly if I timed my goodbye, right if I left before the teasing turned sharp and the old stories made their way out of storage. I didn't see anything unusual where I stood, nothing more than a clean deck catching the last of the sun. I only knew that when the shutter clicked and the group cheered for the cake, the ground beneath me didn't feel like it always had, and the photo we were about to take would be the last picture of our family the way it used to be. The laughter from the patio still echoed when my body stopped responding. 1 second I was smiling for the photo shoulder to shoulder with Kyle, the next I couldn't feel my legs beneath me. The sound of water lapping against the pool mixed with distant music, but everything else seemed to fall away. My mind told me to step back to catch my balance, but my body ignored the command. The world tilted hard and fast, and before I could even gasp, my head struck something solid. The thud rang through my skull, followed by the shock of cold concrete against my cheek. For a long moment, I just stared at the sky, watching it blur at the edges, while laughter carried on somewhere above me. My breath came shallow and slow. I tried to push myself up, but nothing happened. The numbness spread down my spine, and a strange quiet settled inside my chest. I could hear my name being called for another picture, the clink of a glass, my mother's voice reminding someone to bring out the cake. No one noticed that I wasn't standing anymore. Someone's sandals scuffed near my shoulder, and I managed to whisper, "Kyle." My voice cracked halfway through his name. A shadow passed over me, but it wasn't my brother. A woman I didn't recognize knelt beside me, her face creased with alarm. "Are you okay?" she asked, her hand hovering near my arm. That was the first moment anyone realized something was wrong. Blood was running into the corner of my mouth, thick and warm, and I could smell the faint trace of chlorine and sunscreen around me. When I tried to move again, the pain flared sharp and sudden at the back of my head. I could see my mother's heels clicking toward me, her tone clipped with irritation instead of concern. "Grace, get up." "You're making a scene," she said, voice tight like she was afraid of what the neighbors might think. My father's deeper voice followed. "Walk it off," he barked from somewhere near the grill. "You're fine." I wanted to tell them that I couldn't, that something inside me wasn't working, but all that came out was a soft cry that sounded more like a child than a grown woman. The stranger's voice rose above the music. "She needs help. Someone call 911. Her urgency broke through the hum of conversation, and the sound of chairs scraping across the patio followed. My mother's face tightened, her expression caught between annoyance and disbelief. "You're not seriously calling an ambulance, are you?" she snapped. But the stranger had already dialed. I remember catching Kyle's expression across the deck. Just a flicker, almost nothing but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that made the air leave my chest. It wasn't worry, it was satisfaction. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their bright uniforms moving in and out of my fading vision. One of them pressed something cool against my neck. Another checked my pulse. The woman who had helped me stood off to the side, arms crossed, her face pale. I heard her say, "It's slick over here." The paramedic bent down, touched the wet spot on the deck, then rubbed his fingers together. "That's not water," he said quietly. The word oil hung in the air like a sentence I couldn't take back. They fitted a brace around my neck and slid a board beneath me. Every movement sent a bolt of pain through my spine, but I stayed quiet. Somewhere nearby, Officer Jenna Cole was introduced. She crouched down beside me, asking what had happened. I opened my mouth to answer, but Kyle spoke first. It was an accident, he said loud enough for the entire backyard to hear. She slipped. Grace has always been clumsy. His voice carried that same easy charm that used to win him forgiveness for everything. Officer Cole looked at him, then back at me. "Is that true?" she asked gently. My tongue felt too heavy to form words. "No," I managed finally. but the rest dissolved into dizziness as they lifted me toward the waiting ambulance. The ride blurred into flashes of light through tinted windows, the siren a dull thrum in the background. I remember a gloved hand holding mine steady but firm, and a woman's voice telling me to stay awake. My world had narrowed to pain and fragments of thought. Kyle's smile, my mother's sharp tone, the feel of oil beneath my shoes. The last thing I saw before closing my eyes was the reflection of the ambulance lights flickering across the inside of the vehicle, washing everything in red and white. When I woke again, the air smelled of antiseptic and metal. A nurse adjusted an IV line near my bed. My head was bandaged, and a dull ache pulsed deep behind my eyes. My father stood near the door with his arms crossed as though he'd been waiting for hours, but hadn't once sat down. My mother perched on the edge of a chair, her purse still in her lap like she might leave any second. "You gave us a scare," she said, her tone too casual. My father added, "Doctor said you'll be fine, just another one of your stumbles." Before I could respond, the curtain shifted, and a woman in a white coat stepped in. Her name tag read, Dr. Naomi Brooks. She greeted my parents with a nod, then turned her full attention to me. "Ms. Turner, can you tell me what happened before you fell?" she asked. I told her what I could remember: the camera, the laughter, the sudden numbness, the sound of my head hitting the ground. My father interrupted. "She tripped. Always has balance issues," he said with the finality of a man issuing an order. Dr. Brooks didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on me. "You mentioned numbness before the fall." I nodded, and she made a note. They wheeled me for scans shortly after. The hallway lights passed overhead like slow-moving stars. When I returned, Dr. Brooks stood with another physician by the monitors, studying the images in silence. My mother hovered close to them, asking about insurance coverage, whether it would be considered an accident or a pre-existing condition. My father muttered something about unnecessary tests. No one looked at me until Dr. Brooks spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "The MRI shows damage to your spinal cord," she said. The room seemed to tilt again, though this time I was already lying flat. "We'll need to operate immediately to prevent permanent paralysis." The word paralysis echoed longer than any siren. My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Do you need our approval?" she asked. Dr. Brooks shook her head. "Grace is an adult. She can sign for herself." My father's jaw tightened. "We'll handle the paperwork," he said, reaching for the clipboard on the tray beside me. I heard myself say, "No," before I realized it. My hand shook as I signed my own name, and when the nurse asked about a medical proxy, I named Megan Price instead of either of my parents. My father's face reddened, his mouth a thin line. "That's ridiculous," he hissed. "She's not family." I didn't answer. Officer Cole arrived just as they were preparing me for surgery. She stepped close enough that only I could hear her. "We confirmed the residue on the deck," she said quietly. "It was motor oil. Witnesses heard your brother say it would be funny." The words settled over me like another weight I couldn't move. Kyle had done this, and my parents still called it an accident. "Charges are being filed," she added. My mother's voice cut through before I could process it. "This is a misunderstanding," she said sharply. "We'll straighten it out." Officer Cole's expression didn't change. "Focus on your daughter's recovery, ma'am. The rest will proceed through the proper channels." The anesthesiologist entered, then soft-spoken and efficient. As the medication began to blur my vision, I saw my mother lean close, her perfume sharp and familiar. "You need to forgive Kyle before you go in," she whispered. "You don't want bad blood between you." I turned my head slightly, the motion slow and heavy. "He poured oil on that deck," I said. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't answer. The last thing I remember before sleep claimed me was the steady beeping of the monitor and the quiet conviction that nothing in our family would ever look the same again. When I woke again, the room was dim, the air filled with the steady rhythm of machines. My legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. A nurse adjusted my blanket and smiled gently. "Surgery went well," she said. "We'll start physical therapy once you're stronger." My parents were gone. On the tray beside me sat a small card from Megan, a single line written in her familiar handwriting. "You're not alone in this. I traced the words with my fingertip, the reality of everything settling slow but sure. Outside my window, dawn was breaking over the hospital courtyard, and for the first time I couldn't tell whether the light meant an ending or the start of something I hadn't yet imagined. The first week after surgery felt like time had folded in on itself. The days bled together, nurses changing shifts, lights dimming and brightening, the steady beep of the monitor marking hours I couldn't count. My legs stayed numb below the knees. Each morning, Dr. Brooks stopped by her tone steady, explaining that swelling and trauma could take time to settle. I nodded, even when her eyes told me the truth she didn't say out loud. The nurses were kind, efficient, always moving. The only faces that didn't change were my parents. They came in twice a day, always together, always composed, as if politeness could replace comfort. On the third morning, a nurse opened the blinds and said quietly, "You've got visitors." My parents stood side by side at the foot of the bed. My father still wore his jacket zipped halfway, his cap in his hands. My mother's purse rested in the chair, neatly closed. "You're awake," she said, her tone careful. "That's good." My father didn't speak at first. When he did, his words landed like orders. "You'll get through this faster if you stay positive," he said. "No point sitting around feeling sorry for yourself." I wanted to ask what part of paralysis was supposed to inspire optimism, but the effort of speech seemed too heavy. Instead, I said, "The police came by this morning." My mother's head snapped up. About Kyle, she asked quickly. "They said he may face charges." She frowned, eyes darting to my father. "Grace, you can't let this go to court. It was an accident." My father nodded, his voice low but firm. "You'll ruin his life if you make this official." I stared at the ceiling, the pattern in the tiles blurring, and said nothing. Later that afternoon, Dr. Brooks returned with new scans and a different doctor, a tall man with soft eyes who introduced himself as Dr. Evan Hale. He reviewed the images quietly, then turned the screen toward me. "You'll need months of rehabilitation," he said. "It's possible you'll regain partial mobility, but we have to be realistic about the timeline." My throat felt dry. "Will I walk again?" I asked. He hesitated. "We'll do everything we can." When he left, the silence filled with the sound of the air vent clicking on and off. My mother began typing on her phone, and my father turned toward the window. They didn't ask what the doctor had said. That evening, Megan arrived. She didn't bring flowers or a card, just a paper cup of coffee and a look that told me she understood what no one else did. She sat beside the bed, talking about her students, the traffic, anything but what had happened. When she finally asked, "Do you need me to call anyone?" I shook my head. "Just stay," I whispered. She stayed until the nurse made her leave. Her hand squeezed mine before she went, grounding me in a way my family never could. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of therapy consultations and sleepless nights. Physical therapists came to test my response. One tapped a small hammer against my knee, waiting for movement that didn't come. "We'll keep trying," she said gently. My mother grew impatient. "How long will this go on?" she asked the therapist. "She has a job, bills." The therapist glanced at her without replying. I wanted to explain that this wasn't a delay, this was survival, but even that felt too big to say. On the 5th day, a newspaper appeared on my breakfast tray. My mother placed it there as if it were part of my meal. "We wanted you to see this before someone else did," she said. The headline made my stomach drop. "Turner family responds to daughter's false accusations." Beneath it, a photo of my parents and Kyle stood in front of our house, the American flag rippling behind them. The article quoted my father describing the tragic misunderstanding and my brother's deep remorse. My name appeared 3 times each, tied to words like unstable and confused. I looked up at them. "You talked to the press." My mother's lips pressed together. "We needed to correct the story before it got out of hand," she said. "People were calling." My father added, "You don't want the family dragged through the mud, do you?" I folded the paper in half, then again, until the words disappeared. That night, I found my phone on the bedside table, fully charged. Notifications filled the screen, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, comments from strangers. Kyle had posted old photos of us as kids, the captions painting me as attention-seeking, unstable, prone to overreactions. Dozens of people responded with sympathy for him. "Stay strong, bro. Families fight, but love wins." I turned the screen face down and pressed it under the blanket until the light vanished. The next morning, Dr. Hale came in with a calm focus that steadied me. "We're starting your rehab early," he said. "Even small movements help the nerves remember." The first session was brutal. I could barely lift my left leg 2 inches before my muscles gave out. Sweat soaked my gown, and the pain felt like fire spreading down my spine. The therapist, Tyler Grant, knelt beside me. "Good," he said softly. 2 more. Each inch felt like a mile. When we finished, I lay back against the mat exhausted, but strangely aware that I was still fighting. Weeks passed like that, small victories, quiet defeats. My parents visited less often. When they did, their conversations circled around money insurance and public perception. "These medical bills are piling up," my father said one afternoon. "The insurers questioning your version of events." I frowned. "What do you mean, my version?" He avoided my eyes. "They said the deck was slippery, not sabotaged. We told them you should have been more careful." The words hung heavy between us. "You told them that I asked. We're just trying to get coverage," my mother said. "It's complicated." I realized then that they weren't defending me, they were protecting themselves. After they left, I asked the nurse to bring my laptop. The insurance portal showed denial notices stamped in red, claim rejected contributory negligence. Every form listed statements attributed to my parents. I stared until the words blurred. My savings would barely cover another week of care. Dr. Hale found me like that hours later, the screen still open. "We'll find a way," he said quietly. "Don't lose heart." He set a small tripod on my bedside table. "For your camera," he added, "document your progress. Sometimes seeing it helps more than hearing it." His simple kindness caught me off guard. I nodded, unable to speak. The next few days, I began recording small clips, my hands gripping the rail, my first time sitting up without assistance, the way light changed across the hospital wall at sunrise. It gave me something to do besides think. Still, the nights were the hardest. Sometimes I woke gasping, my heart racing, my body remembering the fall. I'd lie there until the tremors passed, the silence too thick to breathe through. Then came my birthday. I didn't tell anyone, but Dr. Hale must have checked my chart. He appeared at noon with a cupcake balanced on a napkin. "For progress," he said with a faint smile. Later, when I scrolled through my phone, I saw nothing from my family. Not a message, not a missed call. The silence was its own answer. By the end of that week, Tyler had me standing between parallel bars. My hands shook as I lifted myself upright, every muscle protesting. "You're doing it," he said quietly. My legs wobbled but held. A nurse at the desk clapped softly. For the first time since the accident, I felt the faint outline of control returning, fragile but real. Then I saw movement at the end of the corridor, my parents stepping out of the elevator watching. My mother's eyes widened when she saw me upright. "You're not even trying to look presentable," she said, her voice carrying down the hall. "No wonder you're still single." I froze. My father stepped closer, lowering his tone. "We need to talk sense into you. Drop the charges against Kyle. Family protects family." Tyler stood nearby, his arms folded, silent witness to the exchange. I gripped the bars tighter, feeling my hands tremble, then steadied them. "When have you ever protected me?" The words came out even not loud but firm. Their faces changed. First surprise, then something unreadable. I took another step, slow but deliberate, moving past them without waiting for a reply. For once, I didn't look back to see their reaction. The next step was mine alone. That night, exhaustion gave way to clarity. My legs ached, my hands throbbed, but inside there was space that hadn't existed before. I looked at the small tripod on my table, and the footage I'd taken, the faint movement of toes, the careful rise from bed, and realized I was building something piece by piece. A record, a truth. As the hospital quieted and the hallway lights dimmed, I opened a new file on my laptop and began typing names, dates, medical bills, therapy notes, evidence. The first step toward the fight I knew was coming. The morning after my confrontation with my parents, the air in my hospital room felt different, quiet, but charged, as if something had shifted just beneath the surface. My legs ached from the previous day's therapy, but I pushed through the soreness. Tyler arrived with his usual calm energy, nodding toward the walker waiting beside the bed. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, gripping the handles. Each movement was slow, deliberate. The pain came sharp and clear, but so did something else, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Every inch I moved felt like proof that I could still move forward, even if it looked different now. Dr. Hale stopped by mid-morning with updates about a rehabilitation program in Seattle that specialized in spinal trauma recovery. "They're pioneering some promising techniques," he said, laying a brochure on the tray table. The picture showed a wide-open therapy room filled with natural light. "You'd qualify for their next intake, but it means relocating for at least 3 months." I stared at the paper, thinking about logistics, rent, insurance bills I hadn't even opened. He seemed to read the hesitation on my face. "We'll work out the details," he said gently. "Just focus on healing." Later that afternoon, Megan called. "I found you a place," she said before I could speak. "Ground floor apartment 2 blocks from the rehab center here in Portland. Wide doorways, accessible, shower, everything you'd need." I could hear her typing in the background, already coordinating details. "My brother's a contractor. He'll install grab bars this weekend." Her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone used to handling storms. I didn't realize I was crying until I heard myself say, "Thank you." She didn't fill the silence with reassurance. She just said, "You've got people now, Grace. Let us show up." Over the next week, I began documenting everything. Each therapy session, every medical charge, even the smallest milestone. The tripod Dr. Hale had given me became my constant companion. I set it up by the bed, capturing short clips of my progress, shaky steps, moments of rest, the look of concentration that crossed my face when I reached for balance. I kept a notebook too, filling its pages with doctor's notes, correspondence, and the timeline of events leading back to the night of the accident. What started as a coping mechanism turned into evidence, a quiet record of truth that no one could rewrite. When the social worker came to discuss my discharge, she spoke carefully, glancing at her notes. "Your lease ends next month," she said. "With your mobility needs, that apartment won't be safe long term. Do you have another option?" I told her about Megan's plan. Relief softened her expression. "That's good," she said. "Most people don't have that kind of support." Her words lingered after she left. Support. It was such a simple thing, but it had always been scarce in my family. 2 days later, a woman in a navy blazer appeared at my door while I was mid-therapy session. She introduced herself as Ava Delgado, an attorney. "I read about your story in the paper," she said. "I'd like to help." Her tone wasn't pitying, just professional, direct. "What your parents told the press complicates things legally, but not impossibly. With your documentation, we can build a strong case." I glanced toward the pile of folders on my nightstand. "I've been keeping records," I said. She smiled. "Then you're already one step ahead. Let's start by making sure your rights are protected." That evening I sat with Ava's business card balanced on my palm, her calm voice echoing in my head. She believed me. She didn't question, didn't minimize, just believed. It had been so long since anyone had done that. I tucked the card into my journal beside the photo Dr. Hale had taken of me standing between the parallel bars. The next morning I received a call from the hospital administrator. "Ms. Turner, I wanted to inform you that your parents have filed a request to be reinstated as your medical proxies," she said. My breath caught. "On what grounds?" I asked. "They've claimed you're emotionally unstable and unable to manage complex medical decisions." The phone slipped slightly in my hand. "That's not true," I said quietly. "We know," she replied. "But the filing requires a legal review. You'll need to respond." Ava came by that afternoon. She scanned the paperwork and exhaled slowly. "This isn't about your health," she said. "It's about control." She flipped through the pages. "We'll contest it immediately. I'll file the response today." Her efficiency steadied me. "How long will it take?" I asked. "A hearing's already scheduled for next week," she said. "I'll be there with you. They won't win this." That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake staring at the glow of the heart monitor, replaying old scenes the way my father used to correct my tone at dinner, how my mother smoothed over every outburst with a smile. Every memory felt like preparation for this moment. They hadn't changed, but maybe I had. When the day of the hearing arrived, Ava met me outside the courthouse. She looked poised, confident, her briefcase tucked neatly under her arm. "Take your time walking in," she said. "We're not rushing this." The courtroom felt colder than I expected. My parents sat at the front, their attorney beside them. My mother's hair was perfectly set, her pearl earrings catching the light. My father's posture was straight-backed and unyielding. They didn't look at me. Judge Ruth Ellison entered her presence commanding without needing to raise her voice. "Let's proceed," she said. My parents' attorney spoke first, describing me as impulsive, erratic, and prone to emotional instability. He presented a folder of my childhood medical records, scrapes, fractures, concussions, all framed as evidence of poor judgment. Ava remained calm. When it was her turn, she stood and opened my notebook. "Your Honor," she began, "these records don't show instability. They show a pattern of neglect." She handed copies to the judge. Repeated injuries, inconsistent explanations, and a lack of medical follow-up, all occurring under her parents' supervision. The judge's expression darkened as she scanned the pages. "Mrs. Turner," she said, addressing my mother, "can you explain these discrepancies?" My mother's hands twisted in her lap. "She was always clumsy," she said softly. "Accidents happened." Ava spoke again. "Accidents that were never reported, never treated properly, and always minimized." The air in the room shifted. For the first time, I saw uncertainty cross my father's face. When Ava finished, the judge turned toward me. "Ms. Turner," she said, "you've shown significant recovery and clear understanding of your situation. I see no basis for guardianship." Her gavel struck once. Petition denied. Further, I'm referring this case for investigation into potential past neglect. The words echoed through the room, steady and final. Outside sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. I breathed it in slow and deep, the first easy breath in weeks. Ava adjusted her papers and looked at me. "You're free to make your own decisions now," she said. "But this doesn't have to be the end. If you choose, we can pursue a civil case." I nodded, though I wasn't sure yet what I wanted beyond the quiet of that moment. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I sat near the window with my cane resting against the chair. The city lights blinked below, distant and calm. My phone buzzed with messages from Megan and Dr. Hale, both asking how it went. I replied simply, "We won." Then I turned off the phone, letting the silence fill the space around me. For the first time since the accident, I felt something close to peace, but beneath it a pulse of resolve that hadn't yet found its voice. The hearing was over, but the story wasn't. There were still questions that needed answers, debts that needed reckoning, and choices I could no longer avoid. Somewhere in that quiet, I knew the real fight was just beginning. The week after the hearing passed in a strange calm, the kind that comes after a long storm, but before you realize what's been damaged. My parents hadn't reached out, not a single text or call, and I hadn't expected one. The quiet felt uneasy, but necessary. Ava came by twice that week to review next steps. "We're in a good position," she said, flipping through her folder. "The judge's investigation will take time, but you should be ready. They may push back." I knew she was right. My parents never surrendered control, they just regrouped. Each morning, Tyler came for therapy, and we focused on walking short distances without the cane. The first few steps always burned like fire through my lower spine, but the rhythm grew steadier with each session. "You've got balance now," he said one afternoon, watching me reach the far wall unassisted. "You're not just moving, you're leading the movement." I caught my breath and smiled, realizing I hadn't heard encouragement like that from family in years. Megan visited often, bringing groceries and a sense of normalcy. We'd eat on the couch while she filled me in on her classroom gossip students who forgot homework, parents who argued over grades. It was simple talk, but it grounded me. She never asked if I'd spoken to my parents, though I could tell she wanted to. The silence between us on that subject was a kind of kindness. One evening, as the sun faded behind the apartment blinds, my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar. "Ms. Turner," the voice said. "This is Karen Lewis from the Multnomah County Courthouse. I'm calling to inform you that Richard and Diane Turner have filed for emergency guardianship again, claiming you're unfit to manage your affairs due to emotional instability." I felt my hand tighten around the phone. "They're trying again?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said. You'll need to appear at the hearing in 2 weeks. Your attorney will receive notice." When I told Ava, she didn't look surprised. "They're testing the system," she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. "But this time we're ready. We'll bring your therapy documentation, Dr. Hale's testimony, and the financial records you've kept. We'll show the court you're stable, independent, and capable." She closed the folder with a decisive tap. "Grace, this isn't just about blocking them. It's about reclaiming the story they've told about you." The days leading up to the hearing moved in a blur of preparation. Dr. Hale wrote a formal report outlining my progress, describing my decision-making as clear, rational, and consistent. Tyler submitted detailed therapy notes showing I could manage daily activities. Megan helped me organize 3 months of journal entries, invoices, and videos documenting every milestone. The evidence piled up like a record of my survival, undeniable, steady, and true. On the morning of the hearing, the sky hung gray and low drizzle, misting the courthouse steps. Ava met me at the entrance, her umbrella tilted slightly to shield me from the rain. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. Inside, the air felt cool and polished, every sound echoing against marble. My parents sat at their table again, their posture identical to before, poised, rehearsed. My mother's hair looked freshly set, her pearl necklace gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. My father's jaw was locked tight, a soldier bracing for orders. When the session began, their attorney launched into familiar accusations. "Ms. Turner has a documented history of instability, including repeated injuries and erratic behavior," he said. "Her parents simply wish to ensure her well-being and prevent further self-harm." The words landed like a script I'd heard my whole life, rewritten with new vocabulary but the same intent. Ava rose calm but firm. "Your Honor," she began, "this narrative is not supported by evidence. What the records actually reveal is a lifelong pattern of injury consistent with neglect, not instability." Judge Ellison glanced through the file Ava handed her. "I see previous reports of unaddressed injuries and delayed medical treatment," she said. "Mrs. Turner, can you explain this?" My mother straightened her skirt, her voice soft. "Grace has always been clumsy," she said. "She bruises easily, gets distracted. We did our best." Ava's reply was measured. Doing your best would have meant seeking help when your child was hurt, not dismissing her pain. The tension in the room thickened. My father's gaze fixed on me, unblinking. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood carefully, steadying myself on the table's edge. "I can manage my medical care, my finances, and my life," I said, my voice level. "I have doctors, therapists, and friends who can confirm that. I don't need guardianship, I need distance." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the judge nodded. "That's clear enough." When the ruling came, it was decisive. The petition was dismissed, and a formal investigation into past family conduct was ordered. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw twitched, but he didn't look at me. The gavel struck once, and it was over. Ava leaned close. "You did exactly what you needed to," she whispered. Outside, the rain had stopped. I took each step down the courthouse stairs with deliberate care, the cane steady in my hand. Ava matched my pace. "You can pursue a civil suit now," she said. "Damages, restitution, even medical costs." I nodded but didn't answer. My thoughts were elsewhere, on the small, ordinary things I wanted back. My classroom. The camera I hadn't touched in months, mornings without fear of a phone call that could undo everything. That evening, Dr. Hale stopped by my apartment, a stack of discharge papers under his arm. "You've hit every milestone faster than expected," he said. "There's a rehabilitation program in Seattle I'd like you to consider. It focuses on trauma recovery, physical and emotional." He placed the papers on the table. "You've done the hard part here. It might be time to look ahead." Megan arrived shortly after with dinner and a box of supplies for the new apartment. We ate quietly, the hum of the refrigerator filling the pauses. So she said, setting down her fork. "Seattle?" I shrugged. "Maybe. I just need to make sure I can handle it." She smiled. "You can handle anything. You already proved that." Later, when the apartment settled into silence, I walked to the window. The city lights flickered below like tiny beacons, steady but never still. My phone buzzed with a message from Ava. Just 3 words. We're not done. I looked at the folder of court documents on my desk, the stack of medical bills beside it, and the empty notebook waiting for the next chapter. She was right. I turned off the light and sat near the window, feeling the ache in my legs settle into something familiar, almost manageable. Outside, the drizzle had started again, soft against the glass, rhythmic and steady. The storm that had followed me for months hadn't passed completely, but for the first time I could see the path beyond it. The week after the second hearing, I thought the worst might finally be over. Ava was gathering files for the civil case. Dr. Hale was finalizing the paperwork for my transfer to Seattle, and I'd started walking short distances without the cane. The days had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal again, coffee cooling beside therapy notes, sunlight pooling on the hardwood, the quiet hum of a neighborhood I was learning to trust. Then one evening, an envelope slid through the mail slot with the courthouse seal. Inside was a summons, not for another hearing, but for mediation. My parents wanted to resolve family matters privately. Ava read it twice before setting it down. "They're looking for leverage," she said. "It's not about reconciliation. It's about control. You don't have to go." I watched the rain streaking down the window. "I want to," I said after a moment. "If they want to talk, I'll listen, but this time it'll be on my terms." The meeting took place in a small downtown law office that smelled faintly of leather and disinfectant. My parents were already seated when I arrived, their attorney arranging papers in neat stacks. My father's posture was textbook military shoulders, squared jaw tight. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue that didn't need to be there. "Grace," she began, "we just want to put this behind us. The stress has been unbearable for everyone." I nodded once, but didn't respond. Their attorney leaned forward. "We're prepared to cover your remaining medical expenses if you agree to withdraw the charges against your brother. The family needs healing, not more division." I opened my folder and placed a photograph on the table, a picture of me in the hospital bed, eyes half open, neck braced. "This was the first day after surgery," I said quietly. Then another photo, my knees bloodied during physical therapy. This was the first time I fell trying to walk again. My mother flinched. My father looked away. I laid down the insurance denial letters next, each stamped in red. "These were rejected because you told the company I was responsible for my own injuries." Their attorney shifted in his chair. "Grace, no one's disputing that what happened was unfortunate." I cut him off gently. "Unfortunate?" I asked. He poured oil on a deck and laughed while I lay bleeding. "You called it clumsiness." I reached into the folder again and unfolded a hospital invoice. "This is what it cost me to survive his prank. My savings, my job, my home." My mother's eyes filled again, but this time the tears looked practiced. "We never meant for any of this," she whispered. "You know your brother didn't mean harm." I straightened the papers into a neat stack. Intent doesn't erase impact. When I stood to leave, my father's voice stopped me. "You walk out of here, you're turning your back on your family." I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "Family doesn't try to take your life apart after you fought to save it." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. I walked out without another word. 2 weeks later, Ava called. "The district attorney wants you to make a victim impact statement," she said. "Trent, sorry. Kyle has agreed to plead guilty to reckless endangerment, but sentencing depends partly on your testimony." My hand tightened around the phone when I asked, "End of the month." The courtroom felt different this time, larger somehow, though I knew it wasn't. My brother sat at the defense table, his suit too sharp, his expression carefully neutral. My parents occupied the front row, their faces carved from the same stone that had once built my childhood home. When the judge called my name, I rose slowly, steadying myself on the cane I still used for balance. I began with the facts: the fall, the injury, the surgeries, the months of rehabilitation. I described the oil found on the deck and the witnesses who'd heard him call it just a prank. Then I looked directly at my brother. The oil didn't just take away my ability to walk, it showed me what was already broken between us. I gestured toward 2 photographs displayed on an easel beside me. The first showed me at 8 years old, my arm in a homemade splint after falling from a tree. The second age, 10 bruises along my back after another accident no one had questioned. "This wasn't new," I said. "It was a pattern. Every time I got hurt, someone laughed or looked away. The courtroom was silent except for the faint shuffle of papers. The physical pain will fade, I continued, but the memory of being left there bleeding, scared, told to walk it off, that doesn't fade. My mother's shoulders trembled, but she didn't cry this time. My father kept his eyes fixed on the bench in front of him. When I finished, the judge thanked me and asked Kyle if he wished to speak. He stood smoothing his jacket. It was supposed to be a joke, he said, his voice unsteady. I didn't think she'd actually fall. I'm sorry. The apology was thin, like a door closing softly but not locking. Judge Ellison reviewed the evidence before delivering her ruling. Mr. Turner, she said, this court finds you guilty of felony reckless endangerment. You will serve 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service at a spinal rehabilitation center. She paused. You are also ordered to pay restitution to your sister for a portion of her medical expenses. Additionally, this case raises questions about the family environment that contributed to this pattern of harm. I'm referring it for investigation into potential past neglect. The gavel struck once clean and final. My mother gasped quietly. My father's expression didn't move. I felt a weight lift, not relief exactly, but something close to release. Outside, the air smelled like rain on hot pavement. Ava stood beside me on the courthouse steps. You did it, she said. Justice doesn't always feel like victory, but this is real. I nodded, feeling the ache in my legs as I descended the stairs. Doctor. Hale was waiting at the bottom, leaning against his car. He didn't rush to help, just watched me make my way down each step on my own. When I reached him, he smiled. You're steadier, he said. Each step's cleaner than last time. I managed a small laugh. Practice, I said. He opened the passenger door for me, but I shook my head. I can manage. His smile deepened quiet pride behind it. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. The phone buzzed with messages, some from reporters, others from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored them all. Across the room, the tripod still stood beside my camera, the red light blinking faintly. I lifted it, aimed toward the window, and pressed record. The lens caught my reflection pale in the glass, the faint tremor in my hands, the steady rise and fall of my breath. For once, I didn't need to document proof for anyone else. This was just for me, a record of standing on my own after everything that tried to break me. As the recording light flickered off, I caught my reflection one last time. The scars were still there, visible and not, but so was the strength that came with them. Outside, a soft wind moved through the street, carrying the scent of rain and something that felt almost like beginning. After the sentencing, the days that followed carried a strange stillness. The courthouse noise had faded, but the weight of everything that came before it lingered in the quiet corners of my apartment. Ava filed the restitution paperwork and handed me a folder marked Pending Investigations. Inside were forms for insurance claims reports from Child Services and a copy of the judge's referral order. There's more to come, she said. This isn't just about your brother. It's about a pattern. I nodded, though part of me still didn't know what closure was supposed to look like. Doctor. Hale increased the intensity of my therapy sessions. Now that you're past the courtroom strain, we can focus on strengthening your left side, he said one morning as Tyler adjusted the parallel bars. The work was slow and relentless. Every muscle protested, but each inch of progress felt like reclaiming something that had been taken without permission. By the end of the week, I was walking short stretches without the cane. The limp was still there, a reminder etched into every step, but it no longer felt like defeat. A few days later, Megan showed up carrying groceries and a small newspaper folded in half. She set it on the table without a word. The headline read, Questions Raised About Turner Family Neglect and Insurance Claims. My parents' names were printed in bold alongside brief quotes from former neighbors and school officials who had remembered concerning incidents. My throat tightened as I scanned the column. Ava had told me the investigation would be discreet, but seeing it in print still made my stomach twist. Megan placed a hand over mine. You didn't start this, she said. The truth did. Over the next week, phone calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. Some went unanswered, but others revealed voices I hadn't heard in years. My cousin Denise left a message saying I always wondered about those injuries when we were kids. I'm sorry we didn't ask more. Aunt Marla called a few days later. Your mother told us stories that never quite lined up, she admitted quietly. I think people are finally realizing that. The words were both comforting and heavy. The cracks that had been invisible my whole life were now wide enough for everyone to see. Then came a letter not from my parents, but from their attorney. The language was formal, polished, and cold. They were requesting a private mediation to discuss family matters in a confidential environment. Ava called it a strategic move. They're not offering peace, she said. They're trying to contain the damage. Still, I agreed to attend, not out of obligation, but because I wanted them to see me literally standing on my own terms. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. My parents sat at one end of the polished table, the same attorney from before beside them. My father's suit looked freshly pressed, and my mother's pearl earrings caught the overhead light. Across from them, Ava opened her briefcase, calm and unreadable. "Let's begin," the attorney said. My father spoke first. "We've had time to think," he said. "We'd like to offer to cover the remaining medical costs in exchange for dropping any further claims." My mother nodded, her voice trembling in a way that didn't match her eyes. "We're still a family, Grace. We just want to move forward." I laid a new folder on the table, thicker than the one they'd brought. Inside were photos, invoices, legal letters, and medical notes. "These are the costs you didn't see," I said, sliding it toward them. "The ones I paid in other ways." I showed them photos of my therapy sessions, the bruises from repeated falls the nights I'd documented myself learning how to stand again. "These were my mornings while you told the world it was my fault." My father's jaw clenched. My mother's lip quivered, but no sound followed. Ava spoke next, her tone even. "My client has no interest in private settlements. The restitution order stands and the civil case proceeds next month. She's not seeking more money, she's seeking accountability." The silence that followed stretched long enough to hear the hum of the air vent. My father exhaled sharply, his voice low. "You're going to destroy this family." I met his eyes. "You did that when you looked away." The meeting ended without a handshake. Outside, the sky had turned a pale blue that hinted at spring. Ava glanced at me as we stepped into the parking lot. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "No anger, no theatrics, just truth." I smiled faintly. That's all that's left. Weeks later, when the civil case formally began, Ava walked me through every detail: insurance records, text messages, financial inconsistencies, even old emails where my parents downplayed my medical condition. The evidence was staggering. But what stayed with me most wasn't the legal work. It was the small, quiet victories in between. The first time I walked around my block without help. The morning Dr. Hale cleared me to drive again. The students who mailed handmade cards from my old classroom, each one signed with, "We miss you, Ms. Turner." The night before the court presentation, Megan stopped by with takeout and a thick envelope. "From some of your old colleagues," she said, handing it to me. Inside were letters of support from the school district teachers, administrators, even parents of students I'd helped over the years. One note read, "Your resilience teaches more than any science lesson could." I pressed the pages together, my throat tightening. The following morning, I stood outside the courthouse steps again, cane in hand, but walking taller than before. Ava placed a hand on my shoulder. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about rewriting the record." I nodded, and closing the door behind it. Inside the courtroom was quiet but crowded reporters, observers, a few distant relatives who couldn't stay away from the spectacle. My parents sat together at the front, their faces drawn tight. Kyle wasn't there. His court-mandated service had already begun at the rehabilitation center. As testimony began, Ava presented a timeline of every decision they had made, from the insurance fraud to their repeated attempts at control. Her words were calm and deliberate, each sentence a measured stone laid on a foundation that could no longer crack. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the stand without assistance, steady but slow. "I'm not here for punishment," I said. "I'm here for acknowledgement. The people who said they loved me hurt me, and the silence around it kept it alive for years. I'm ending that silence today." When the session ended, the judge set a date for the final ruling. The crowd began to file out quietly. My parents didn't look back as they left their footsteps fading down the marble hall. I stayed seated for a moment, the weight of everything settling into a kind of stillness that wasn't peace yet, but close. Ava gathered her papers, giving me a nod. "We're almost there," she said. That night back home, I placed the letters from my colleagues beside the court documents and photographs. The stack looked like two lives, sitting side by side, the one I'd been given and the one I'd rebuilt. I turned off the lamp and stood by the window. The reflection staring back was the same woman who'd once fallen broken and forgotten, but now she stood straight, shoulders squared. The case wasn't finished, but something inside me was. Beyond the window, dawn was beginning to edge the horizon. The sky was pale and wide open like a blank page waiting for the next chapter to begin. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The judge upheld every claim Ava had filed and ordered restitution through the insurance company, along with an official record clearing my name of any past negligence. It was quiet justice, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but carries weight in the way a person stands a little taller afterward. When I left the courthouse, I didn't look for my parents or wonder if they'd turn around this time. That chapter had closed the moment I chose to speak the truth, even when it cost me the illusion of family. Life after the verdict wasn't a sudden sunrise. It came in small, gradual ways, the steady rhythm of physical therapy, the smell of fresh coffee in my kitchen each morning, the sound of my own laughter returning after months of silence. Dr. Hale stopped by on Fridays to check my progress, always pretending it was a coincidence that his schedule matched mine. "You're walking stronger," he said one afternoon, setting down a folder. "You don't even reach for the wall anymore." I smiled. Sometimes I forget I used to. Megan and I started hosting small dinners again. The first one felt awkward, as if we were both testing whether joy could sit comfortably in the same room after so much pain. But laughter came easily by dessert. Tyler joined one evening, sharing updates from the rehab center where Kyle was serving his community service. "He's quiet," Tyler said carefully, "but he's working hard. He's learning what it feels like to help instead of harm." I didn't respond, only nodded. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer yet, but knowing he was facing what he'd done was enough for now. Spring brought a new rhythm. My photography began to attract attention online, and a local gallery invited me to exhibit a collection. I titled it The Fall and Rise. Each image told a fragment of my story: the hospital bed, the first steps, the courtroom bench, the open road outside my apartment window. The night of the opening, the room glowed with soft light and quiet conversation. Dr. Hale stood by the door, Megan and Ava near the refreshments, each of them part of the mosaic that rebuilt my life. I took a deep breath and walked to the center of the gallery. Hanging on the far wall was a single photograph taken the morning I decided to live alone again, sunlight stretching across my floor, my cane leaning against the chair. Beneath it, I had written a single line: "Strength isn't about walking without pain, it's about walking anyway." Visitors stopped to read it, their expressions thoughtful, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink from being seen. The following month, I began teaching a small photography workshop at the community center. My students were survivors in their own ways, some from accidents, some from losses no camera could capture. We learned together how to tell stories through light and focus through what was left unseen. One afternoon, as I helped a student frame her shot, she looked up and said softly, "You make us feel like we're still becoming." Her words stayed with me long after class ended. A letter arrived not long after from my Aunt Marla. Inside was an invitation to the family's annual Thanksgiving dinner, handwritten in careful cursive. "We miss you. Everyone's asking about you." I read it twice, then placed it on the counter. That night I wrote a short reply. "Thank you for thinking of me. I won't be attending. I hope it's a good day for everyone." There was no anger in the decision, just a quiet certainty. Some doors don't need to be slammed, they just need to stay closed. Instead, I planned a small Thanksgiving of my own. Megan brought her favorite casserole. Dr. Hale arrived with a pie that looked suspiciously store-bought, and 3 of my students came with mismatched plates and laughter that filled every corner of my apartment. As we ate, the warmth around the table felt like something stronger than tradition. It felt chosen, steady, and real. When the plates were cleared, I lifted my glass. To the family we build, I said, my voice steady but soft. And to the strength we find when we stop apologizing for surviving. The clinking of glasses echoed through the room, gentle and full of light. Later, Megan handed me a small leather album. Inside were photographs from the past year, therapy sessions, our dinners the day of the exhibition. On the first page, she had written, "The Real Family Album." That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window again. The city lights shimmered across the glass, and my reflection stared back, a woman changed but not broken, walking with a slight limp and a full heart. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain, and something that felt like peace. I've learned that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's the quiet power of standing on your own, the courage to tell your story, and the grace to keep walking even when the ground remembers every fall. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being torn down, I hope my story reminds you that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing yourself one steady step at a time. And if this story found a piece of truth in you, take a moment to share it or simply sit with it. Sometimes the quiet acknowledgement of another person's survival is the most powerful thing we can offer.